Well, hello, church. We are ordering our salvation, and today we're going to look at a few more trees. Again, we're looking at the whole forest of salvation, and we've kind of laid out that forest. But today we're going to pick up on a couple of different trees that we've been looking at trees, but we're going to look at a couple of different ones today. The big categories. So, as it were, there are different groves on the hillside that make up this forest. And the first grove that we've been looking at are the works of God alone in eternity. The works of God alone in eternity. And the second grove that we'll take a look at will be the works of God alone in time. And then the third grove will be the works of God that are cooperated with, that as believers we are to be in unity with God as we work in those things with God's help and support and spirit and all of that. And then the last grove that we'll look at are the future works that God will accomplish. But today we're going to look at the grove of the works of God in eternity. We're going to see, yesterday we looked at foreknowledge and eternal decree. And so those were God looking forward and intimately knowing a person. That was his foreknowledge. He did that. It's out of his omniscience, right? So his omniscience, he knows all things. There's not anything hidden from God. But within the sphere of that being, of knowing everything, he focused his attention onto specific people who were foreknown. He foreknew them in an intimate, loving kind of way. And that was according to his eternal decrees, his will, his decision. But we decided yesterday we couldn't figure out his will without looking at all of salvation, because his will is revealed in the working out of what Christ has come to do. And so there's really no logical progression or sequential progression in eternity. And so we can't figure out which one we want to put first. And so we look at the decrees, and out of those decrees come this foreknowledge, but we have to work with them together. We cannot separate them and make one superior than the other. And then the two that we'll look at today, the two trees we're going to focus in on in this forest, are election and predestination. Election and predestination. So the first one is election. And we're looking at the Pocket Dictionary definition of that. And it is this: God's choosing of individuals or people to bring about God's good purposes. In general terms, election can refer to God's choosing of persons for a type of service, while in a more particular sense, election refers to God's choosing of persons to inherit salvation through Jesus Christ. So God chooses Israel as a nation, and he chooses to make them his nation. That is an elective purpose. He also chose Moses out of that nation to be the one who would bring that nation out of Egypt into Israel. And so he chose him for a specific purpose. But the way we're going to use the term election is this election unto salvation. So those people that he elects to inherit salvation. And that's the one we'll look at today. If you remember, 1 Peter 1 and 2 kind of talks about it. Peter says this: Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect, to those who are chosen by God, right? The chosen that are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God. So they are elect according to foreknowledge. And that they're elect according to foreknowledge into, or in, the sanctification of the Spirit. So into that sphere. They're chosen into that sphere for, or resulting in, obedience to Jesus Christ and for the sprinkling with his blood. So we said into obedience and resulting in obedience and resulting in the atonement, the sprinkling of the blood. And so this is what we look at when we're looking at election, just from that passage, that election is according to foreknowledge. Foreknowledge precedes it. Election is unto sanctification in the Spirit. Therefore, election precedes sanctification. So you could say foreknowledge, election, sanctification, if you're just looking at those three. Now, foreknowledge is the basis of election, and election is into sanctification, and that sanctification results in obedience and the atonement. And so that's the order we're seeing in this, just out of this particular verse. But look at Romans 9, 10 through 12. Then we're going to look at 16 also. It says this, and not only so, but when Rebekah had conceived children by one man, our forefather Isaac, though they were not yet born and had done nothing, either good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of him who calls. So God's purpose, what he determined for election, is that so that it might continue, not because of works. So God's purpose in election was not that people would work, but it would be based on his calling of them. Let's look at 16. It says this. So she was told the older will serve the younger. The older twin will serve the younger twin. So God chose Jacob, not Esau. Esau was born first as the older twin. He was told that he would serve Jacob. And then we have 16. It says, so then it, that is election, depends not on human will or exertion, but on God who has mercy. Election depends on God who has mercy. In juxtaposition to, you either have God's mercy or you have human will or exertion. And the verse is saying human will and exertion are put aside, and God's mercy is what election depends on. And so this is what we see in election. Election is not based on work of the elect. So the working of the elect is not included in why people are elected. Election is based on the one who calls. He is the one who calls, and the one who calls grounds election, not the work of the one elected. Election is grounded in God's mercy. Notice it's mercy. God's mercy, if we were going to define mercy, we would say not receiving what we do deserve. And so mercy is I'm not getting what I actually deserve. I'm getting elected instead of what I deserve. If I were to get what I deserve, I wouldn't have been chosen. But because it's God's mercy that grounds election, I don't get what I deserve. Does that make sense? I hope. And so election, you see, it is grounded in foreknowledge. Election is into the sanctification of the Spirit that results in your obedience and your atonement. And election is based on God who calls, based in his mercy. That is election. Now there's a whole lot more we could say about election, and there's a whole lot of books that actually say it. We're just trying to order it. We're trying to order it according to the scriptures so that we can understand this salvation. So let's look at predestination. And again, predestination, according to our book, the Pocket Dictionary of Theological Terms, says this: the sovereign determination and foreknowledge of God. Some theologians connect divine predestination with the central events of history, especially the death of Jesus and the foreknowledge of God. In theology, the doctrine of predestination is more specifically holds that God has from all eternity chosen a specific people to bring into eternal communion with himself. So predestination, as I've studied it and as I understand it from the scriptures, is in juxtaposition with God's decrees. So God has decrees and he decides. This is his decision, his will. He determines what the end is. And that's his will. He decides the goal. And predestination is the means by which he's going to reach that goal. And so when God wills that he will save, he predestines into adoption. He predestines that we have an inheritance. And so the means by which he predestines is the meaning of how we're going to get from point A to God's intended goal, which was his decree. So the decrees and predestination are different. One is ends, the decision made. One is means. How do we get through all the stuff we need to work through to get to the intended goal? Does that make sense? I hope it does. Let's look a little bit at some of these. Even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. So here you have election. We're chosen to be in Christ before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him. So that's the determination. He chose to save that we would be holy and blameless. How do we get there? He predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ according to the purpose of his will. So do you see that? He decided the purpose of his will was to save us in Christ. Therefore, he predestines us to be adopted. And so the purpose of God, the will of God, the decisions of God were carried out by the predetermined means, predestined. So he predestines our pathway so that we end in the goal that he has chosen. So that's predestination. And we'll look at a couple more passages as well. In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will. So you have the counsel of his will and the things that he has purposed out of that counsel. So he's decided in his mind, out of all the options, what he's going to do, and then he predestines how to get that done. So in him you have obtained an inheritance. So that's the goal. I've got an inheritance. Where did that goal come from? That came from his counsel and his decision coming out of that counsel. And then based on that decision from that counsel, there was a goal, a predestined means by which we were to achieve that goal. In him we have an inheritance because we have been predestined. And we were predestined according to his purpose, his decision. And that decision was from him who works all things. He works out all things. That's the means, according to the counsel of his will. And so you have God's counsel, God's decision, his working out through predestination to bring us to his desired end. And so predestination has to do with the means by which God achieves his decrees, which have to do with his end. So what is his goal and how is he going to get there? The goal is decided, it's decreed, his decision is made, and then predestination is the means by which he's going to reach that goal. And so this one we've looked at election, God's choosing people, but he chooses them to be saved, and so then he predestines the means by which they're going to get there. The means by which they're going to arrive at the end goal, which is their ultimate salvation. And so the works of God alone in eternity, the four trees that we have looked at in this grove, are his foreknowledge, his eternal decrees, his electing of people based in his mercy, based on his call, not based on their works, and then his predestination, or his decision to work out the means by which that elect person will achieve the goal he's decided for them. And so those are the four that we have seen in this aspects of eternal salvation, this eternity, things God does in eternity to save. And those four have been ordered in salvation. Don't worry, there's going to be a summary video where after I've gone through the grove, I'm going to put the grove together so that we understand the summary of how all those things work together. Okay? But for today, that's going to be it. And you search the scriptures, write some questions down. We will meet at some point and talk about these things so that we can further search the scriptures together. Okay? Have a great day, church, and I'll talk to you tomorrow, or I'll see you tomorrow.